Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yashoda Nandana Raja Jana Ranjana. Yashoda Nandana Raja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yashoda Nandana Raja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Shri Shri Radha Madhava ki, Shri Shri Radha Gokulananda ki. Jai Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajikacharya Ashtottara Sata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki. Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shama Kunda Radha Kundi Giri Govardhan ki. Shri Vrindavan Dhama ki. Mayapur Navadvipa Dhama ki. Ganga Mai ki. Yamuna Mai ki. Bhakti Devi ki. Srimati Tulsi Maharani ki. Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda ki. Nitai Gaur Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the lotus feet of Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet Nashtaprayeshva Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavati Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtike. So today we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, and this is chapter 10. Bhagavatam is the answer to all questions, text 14. Adidaivam athadhyatmam. Text, sorry, this is 14 I'm reading. Okay, so I'll read the translation for 14 and 15 and then we'll recite 16 together. Thank you. So translation for text 14. Just hear from me how the potency of his lordship divides one into three, called the controlling entities, the controlled entities, and the material bodies, in the manner mentioned above. Text 15. From the sky situated within the transcendental body of the manifesting Mahavishnu, sense energy, mental force, and bodily strength are all generated, as well as the sum total of the fountainhead of the total living force. Text 16. Anupranantiyam pranaha. Anupranantiyam pranaha. Pranantam sarvajantushu. Pranantam sarvajantushu. Apanantam apananti. Apanantam apananti. Naradeva mivanugaha. Naradeva mivanugaha. Anupranantiyam pranaha. Pranantam sarvajantushu. Apanantam apananti. Naradeva mivanugaha. Anupranantiyam pranaha. Pranantam sarvajantushu. Apanantam apananti. Naradeva mivanugaha. Shri Shri Radha Gokulananda ki. Anuprananti, follow the living symptoms. Yam, whom, prana, senses. Pranantam, endeavoring. Sarva jantushu, in all living entities. Apanantam, stop endeavoring. Apananti, all others stop. Naradevam, a king. Iva, like. Anugaha, the followers. Translation by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. As the followers of a king follow their Lord, similarly, when the total energy is in motion, all other living entities move. And when the total energy stops endeavoring, all other living entities stop sensual activities. Purport: the individual living entities are completely dependent on the total energy of the Supreme Purusha. No one has independent existence, just as no electric lamp has independent effulgence. Each and every electrical instrument depends fully on the total powerhouse. The total powerhouse depends on the reservoir of water for generating electricity. Water depends on the clouds depend on the sun depends on creation, and the creation depends on the movement of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Thus, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the cause of all causes. Srila Prabhupada ki. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Om Vishnuvaya. So this is a nice chapter of the second canto, the last chapter in fact. And it has a special purpose. It introduces us to the complexities of the universe that will now be discussed in detail in subsequent cantos of the Bhagavatam. And so the very first verse of chapter 10 is an important verse. Atra sarga visargascha stanam poshana muttayah manvantara ishanu katha nirodha muktirashrayah. And it speaks about the 10 subject matters that are found in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And they are given as follows: creation, subcreation, planetary systems, protection by the Lord, creative impetus, change of manus, science of God, returning back to Godhead, liberation, and the summum bonum. So these are the 10 subject matters that are required for any piece of literature to be considered a Mahapurana. And so it is very, very important that Srimad Bhagavatam for us fulfills that criteria, which is accepted by Vedic scholars. So to give us a little idea as to the direction of this, text 2 gives us a very nice reason for the subsequent discussion, which is going to be in great detail. And it says, to isolate the transcendence of the summum bonum, the symptoms of the rest are described, sometimes by Vedic inference, sometimes by direct explanation, and sometimes by summary explanation given by the great sages. So there's a specific focus in the Bhagavatam's purpose and mission. Now, as we know right from the very beginning of Canto 1, anything not connected to Krishna, any type of Kaitava dharma is kicked out straight away. Bhagavatam simply rejects such things. And from its very inception, from the discussion with Narad Muni from Srila Vyasadeva, the purpose of the Bhagavatam is clear: to focus exclusively on the Supreme Lord and His pastimes, because this alone will allow people to develop, to make some progress in their life, rather than consider that religion is a means of feeding our material desires and material ambitions. So the Bhagavatam starts with this mission. And therefore, a lot of detail is now going to be given through different cantos. Especially in Canto 3, a lot of technical details will be described about the elements, the creation, the material universes, the sub-creation by Lord Brahma. And here is the purpose given in this verse: to isolate the transcendence of the summum bonum, to illustrate how, despite there being so much complexity, creative skill, artistic design within this universe, the Supreme Lord remains transcendental. He is and will always be transcendental to anything within this world, whether it's objects, phenomena, concepts even. Some people can easily reject objects in this world, but they may be very attached to material concepts. All of those are rejected by the Bhagavatam as being of fundamental importance in coming closer to Krishna. So with this sort of background in mind, we have this series of verses, texts 14 to 16, which builds upon a few technical verses that came earlier. It speaks about the material ingredients, then how different symbols are generated. And then in text 14, how the potency of the Lord is divided into three. And that potency can be understood to be the controlling entities, the controlled entities, and the material bodies. So hopefully that's easy to see. The controlling entities are who? Controlling entities are individual souls, right? Each soul is the controlling entity. It is the knower of the field, as we know from the Gita and the Kshetragya. But not the knower, it is the knower of the field of that particular individual's body. But not the knower of all fields. Only the super soul fulfills that function. So that's the controlled entities. That's the controlling entities. Then the controlled entities are those who are controlled, which also is the souls. Now the category of controlling entities is big, because there are many entities in this universe who exercise control. The devas, the demigods themselves, although not on the platform of Lord Vishnu, also exercise control over other living entities. We as living entities exercise control over our bodies, and so therefore the third category here is the material bodies. So the Gita explains how that there are different material elements, and the soul sits on this carriage of material energy, yantra rudhani mayaya, and it directs that carriage in its wanderings according to its desires. So these three concepts always exist. The material situation, the living individual entity, each individual person, and then the Supreme Lord and a whole category of other controllers. Lord Shiva is a controller, so many others, great devatas, Lord Brahma and others are controllers. So that in brief, in one verse, is the overall makeup of the entire creation, in one sense. And then in text 15, it speaks about how from the sky, all within the body of Mahavishnu, sense energy, mental force, bodily strength are generated. We all know these things exist. We all use the power of our senses. And of course, Vedic senses do not include just the 5 knowledge-acquiring senses. In English, in our general upbringing, we know we have 5 senses: tongue, taste, ear, mouth, etc. Those are only the knowledge-acquiring senses. There are another 5, which are the active senses, the karmendriyas. These are the hands, the legs, the genitals, the mouth, and so forth. The items in our body which act, which allow us to function. So Vedically, they're also termed senses, because there are certain similarities with them from a perspective of transcendence. And so we're understanding that there's a sum total of the fountainhead of total living force. Now that's quite a cryptic statement in itself. The sum total of the fountainhead of the total living force. So there's an aggregation, you can say, of living entities, a collection of living entities. They comprise a total living energy, if you like. And then there are all these other components which the Lord has created to allow that group of living entities to function within this world. See, as living entities, we're not supposed to be in this world at all. And the problem is that we are pure spirit souls. Our definition or our makeup is Satchidananda, full of eternity, knowledge and bliss. But we're here in this world where every single thing we experience is the direct opposite. Right from the body to any object in this world, all of it is the direct opposite of Satchidananda. And therefore we need actually a whole framework just to allow us to exist in this place. And therefore from the ego, which is the first item that allows us to just basically function, that ego and that ignorance, which are the first items created by Brahma, secondary creation, and it comes later, these allow us to foolishly think that we are meant to be here in this world. This is what the combination of false ego and ignorance does to us. We think we are supposed to be here, and they allow us to function here as if this is our home. With our full intelligence, we would never be able to do that, because it's not the case. We need a completely different environment to function fully. Yet we are here discussing the material makeup that allows us to exist. And so Mahavishnu is the agent who creates all these items. Now text 16 comes to the crux of this matter, where it says, as the followers of a king follow their lord, and when the total energy is in motion, everything else moves. And there's an example given of the electric powerhouse and the power station and the light bulb. The idea is that when the Supreme Lord decides to stop his activities, absolutely everything else stops. All the energies that he created stop working. All the physical objects that he created lose their properties. Everything fails. And this is the link that people in this world who are atheistic by nature miss completely. Now in this purport, Srila Prabhupada gave a chain of dependency. I'll just read some of it. He says, every electrical item depends on the powerhouse. The powerhouse depends on water. This must be some hydroelectric thing Prabhupada is thinking of for generating electricity. Water depends on the clouds. Clouds depend on the sun. You can find the cause depending on how far back you go. But largely scientists will stop a step or two beyond that. Clouds depend on the sun depends on creation. And creation depends on the movement of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That's the bit they don't like. They think the creation doesn't depend on anything and just moves on its own. It itself was created on its own, without the input or power of the Supreme Lord. And therefore these are fallacies which are not even scientifically rigorous. Because in everyone's experience, there is nothing created without a creator. A person has yet to prove that something popped into existence without there being a set of attributable causes. So people in general make great discoveries and great progress by trying to identify the cause behind something, up to a certain level. After all, how can you treat diseases without understanding something about the cause? No, huge amounts of study, effort, research goes into understanding the cause of diseases, as an example. So much effort goes into understanding the laws of physics, the electromagnetic spectrum, the way dynamics works within different fluids, that then allow us to make phones, satellites, aeroplanes, so many things. Without that higher level of study, you couldn't make those items. So when someone has a superior understanding of a subject, they will be able to utilize those energies for some purpose. Now that purpose may not be necessarily wholesome, but that doesn't change the principle that in order to make something, whether it's an item for someone's benefit or whether it's a weapon, one needs to have expertise in that particular field. So there is a great deal of expertise in the world. So much intelligence is found in the world. Prabhupada said there are very, very intelligent people everywhere. But the problem is, their intelligence is misused, misdirected for the wrong purpose. The basic project is sense gratification, and the pursuit of sense gratification directly leads to destruction, exploitation, war. These are natural consequences of a deep inbuilt lust for sense gratification. Depending on the level to which someone wishes to obtain it, they have corresponding levels to which they're prepared to go in this program of exploitation and usurping. And of course we are usurping Mother Nature's resources on a daily basis. but hardly do we offer her thanks. But here we understand where that nature comes from, where all that energy itself comes from. It comes from the manifestation of the body of the Supreme Lord Mahavishnu. As we know, Karanodakshaya Vishnu is lying in the causal ocean, right? From the pores of his, he's floating, and from the pores of his body, innumerable universes manifest. Within each of those universes, a portion of the Purusha enters. It's Garbhodakshaya Vishnu. Fills half of that universe with perspiration from his body, and then engineers the appearance of Brahma, who is the supreme engineer, on top of a lotus. So this picture in front of me is one which shows this. It shows Karanodakshaya Vishnu with multiple universes emanating, and there's one universe shown in that sphere, which depicts Garbhodakshaya Vishnu and Lord Brahma. And then the Lord then manifests in his third aspect, Kshirodakshaya Vishnu, within each universe, and remains there in the milk ocean and simultaneously as the super soul in everyone's heart. That's how the Lord appears. That's his creation. So at every moment when the Srimad Bhagavatam is giving us some details, some scientific knowledge, it is described only in a very overview fashion in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Because the Bhagavatam is not meant to be a physics textbook. There is only very superficial details given, and certainly no details that would be sufficient for someone spontaneously to start exploiting the resources of nature. There are other shastras which do that, some of which have thankfully been lost. And you may be wondering why I say thankfully, but there are elements of science and weaponry described which, if we had access to a knowledge of them, we would make a far bigger mess in this world than we already do. As Prabhupada said, the only real type of weapon we have at the moment is fire weapons, right? Things that go bang and explode and cause fires. But there's a whole class of different weapons based on ether, air, water. Imagine if we had access to these. We hear about some of these in Krishna's pastimes, right? When there's a big fight there's a Shiva Jwara and a Vishnu Jwara, and there's water weapon in the Mahabharata. And some of these are commanded by mantras. Some of these are only found in the realms of the demigods. And Arjuna somehow by his prowess, while exiled in that forest, managed to please Indra with his fighting and received a whole load of weapons that were given to him. So these weapons would not just be given to anyone who offers the highest bid, as happens today. Things were more careful. If you're going to train someone to use a Brahmastra, they have to have certain qualities and characteristics. Therefore, only a very few handful of people knew how to use those weapons. And therefore, there was great assessment and character assessment before such weapons would be given. And therefore, a long period of training, also under the guidance of someone. That whole principle of a guru, which applies in all fields, not just in Brahminical progress. It applies in all fields of human endeavor. And so, if we had possession of all these items, we would really make a big mess. Because in Kali Yuga, the principles and our behavior becomes very degraded. Our motivations in life are not the highest motivations. Our motivations are not centered around dovetailing or directing all our energy and effort towards the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In Kali Yuga, we largely try to satisfy the senses. And therefore, a society which allows its citizens to obtain maximum sense gratification is considered an advanced society. If you look at this concept intelligently, it doesn't make much sense. Because the senses include the mind in a broader definition of sense objects, senses, and then the mind is considered one of the senses, sometimes described as the sixth sense. The mind comes up with all sorts of concoctions. I would like to do this today. I would like to do this tomorrow. I would like to go here, see this. This person annoyed me in the past, I would like to get them back. You know, what goes on in our minds on a typical daily basis. It's a whole concoction and a collection of thoughts, confused directives, confused ideas, and multiple influences from others, which somehow we churn for the entire day and night when we dream. And as a result of this, we engage in actions. But there's a step missing. The step missing is considering whether that action is worth engaging in. Just because the mind concocted the idea that we should do it, or the mind decided, I like the idea of this, even a philosophy, this sounds like a nice philosophy. Where is the step in between where you actually assess, actually, is this good? Is this beneficial? Will it help society? Will it help me? So in modern terms, a free society is one which allows one maximum capability to do whatever their mind dictates. So now you can see where this is leading. Because any society that facilitates our uncontrolled, unrestricted, influenced mind, influenced by multiple propaganda sources, to do whatever it wants as quickly as possible with minimum restrictions, is going to end in disaster. And is going to cause disaster for the very person who exercises that power. So each person has some independence, that's clear. Each person can do whatever they want in the course of the day. But a person who actually makes advancement is one who follows the 6th chapter of the Gita, Dhyana Yoga. One who learns to control the mind, to regulate the mind, to make the mind and senses still, so that just as multiple rivers enter the ocean, but the ocean is not duly agitated, despite the fact that multiple thoughts will enter into our mind during the course of a day, the mind doesn't get perturbed and doesn't immediately throw down the japamala and go off to exercise whatever just came into the mind. So this chapter in chapter 6 in the Gita is very important because it allows us to detach ourselves from just being wired in to fulfilling whatever the mind and senses dictate. It's a necessary component of spiritual progress. And therefore, when we understand through this series of verses and this chapter about the transcendence of the Supreme Lord, how fallible we are as persons, and how our engagement with the material energy will really lead to trouble for us over the longer period, and trouble lifetime after lifetime, then we have a chance to refocus our energies, put in place that decision-making activity between the thought and the action. That's very important. Is the action I'm about to perform, the decision I'm about to take, in accordance with the recommendations of the Acharyas, the desire of Krishna, the instructions of Srila Prabhupada, the recommendation of devotees? Does it do that? Is it for my benefit? If it isn't, and we have the presence of mind to make that assessment, then we stand a chance of purifying ourselves. Otherwise, acting on our thoughts means we progressively become more and more impure, because that is the nature of this world. So this was really just a brief intro into this whole world of technicality that we're going to get into. Some details are given in chapter 10, but really, as I say, Canto 3 covers a lot of that in more detail. And in Kapila Shiksha, a lot more information is given, where Kapila Dev speaks about Sankhya philosophy to his mother Devahuti. And so we're preparing to understand that when these descriptions are given, we'll probably not understand most of them. Some of the terminology is quite difficult to translate into English. Even if perfectly translated, we don't necessarily have the faculties to understand these scientific descriptions. So we have to have some humility as we approach this subject matter, that we may not be able to understand something, even if it is given to us on a plate. And therefore we need to always maintain the focus of this program, to understand the Lord's creation with a view to understanding how He Himself is the source of it, is at the head of that creation. So I'll stop there and I'll take any questions on this section, if anyone has. Because then there's a few minutes I'll speak about the Panihati festival. Yes, Mataji?
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. It's not straight to the class, but it's related. So when, because you were mentioning about the creation and the different universes, I was wondering when Krishna in Bhagavad Gita says that I instructed this science first to Vivasvan, the sun god, does it refer only to our universe, or is it the same in all universes?
Yes, well, Vivaswan specifically, Manurikshvakve Bravit, and that sequence is specifically found in this universe, but there is a replica of that in other universes too. And so it's Sri Radha Gokulananda ki jai. So it's more specific information that is in our particular history here. But really in each and every universe there is a Brahma. We know that, and the Brahmas in different universes are of different capabilities. There are multiple, we've heard that our Brahma has 4 heads representing 4 dimensions in one sense. Other Brahmas have multiple heads, which means that those universes are many, many times more complex than ours. And so we can see there might be a more complex understanding for that particular universe. But the principle remains the same, that the Supreme Lord is the source of all that knowledge. And he puts in place a parampara, a system. So this specifically is the parampara that is going through that lineage. And so there's a parampara of saintly kings which starts from really the topmost person, the sun god, Vivasvan, and then goes down. And then there is a separate parampara which is actually of more use to us, really, and that is the parampara of the Brahmanas, the parampara, the spiritual parampara. So when Krishna says in the Gita that the science as it is was lost in due course, that generally refers to the Kshatriya parampara, or the parampara of the kings, whereas the devotees of the Lord, through the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, the parampara, etc., they maintain that. Not necessarily in a visible way throughout society widely, because there are times when spiritual knowledge starts to become covered. In Kali Yuga, it's very much covered. It's only really found in a handful of places, in a handful of people even, a handful of cultures. And so you have this problem that things get progressively more and more covered, but still it's preserved. And therefore the acharyas play this role of protecting spiritual knowledge, carefully preserving it despite the best efforts of everyone around them to contaminate that knowledge. You can imagine that many people may be attracted to certain types of knowledge, spiritual knowledge, but they may not necessarily have a certain staunch adhikar to preserve that knowledge. So what happens then is they become familiar with that knowledge, and when it becomes their turn to present that knowledge to others, acting as a link in the parampara, they present it with some confusion, or they present it with a loss of culture, or a loss of certain aspects which go along with that knowledge. So that's always a running risk in everything, right? In every piece of knowledge we acquire in society, there is always the risk that the teacher will either help you acquire good knowledge, as Shukadeva Goswami does. It says that when he spoke the Bhagavatam, that subject matter became even more relishable. It was already relishable, but when he spoke it, it became even more relishable. Nigama kalpataror galitam phalam. Whereas in the case of Chinese whispers, or in modern society, when someone else speaks it, there's always a risk it becomes degraded in some way. But there are always some people who don't care for societal norms, who don't care for the expectations of society, who have simply 100% focus on the Supreme Lord. They don't feel a need to adjust philosophy to satisfy anyone's mentality. They stick to that philosophy and it's preserved. So whilst I can't say for sure whether that chain exists in all universes, it exists in our universe, and we can understand that each universe contains living entities. They all go through cycles, taking shelter in the body of Lord Vishnu during a devastation, then in the body of Lord Brahma even, in a partial devastation. Then they re-emerge. So if that principle also applies to other universes, then this system would also apply. The system whereby knowledge is disseminated through a chain of teachers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. You had your hand up? Yeah.
Just something caught my attention as you were speaking. I don't know if I can properly formulate a question around this, but if I could just mention something and perhaps you can comment, and if you can, get a question.
I'll try.
Out of it. Right. Okay. So it caught my attention that you were mentioning how this overall explanation of the way things are, in this particular text, Srila Prabhupada didn't go into so much detail. Yeah? So, we have the overall picture of there's God, there's the soul, there's cosmic manifestation, etc. I speak to quite smart kids who are products of modern education. And, perhaps they've got a degree in chemistry, biochemistry, physics, or what have you. And if one talks about the basic overall picture that Srila Prabhupada explained in Life Comes from Life, there's a Supreme Lord, there's the soul, just the overall picture, they can say, I can buy that. They're not against theological concepts or theistic ideas. But then when we go into the detail, we start talking about the stuff that I used to read in magazines like Origins and what have you. At that point they say, no way, that goes against genetics as we understand it and what have you. So you preach to a lot of smart people. How do you cope with that? I dealt with it by saying, just going for the life comes from life, some of the stuff that Akandadi was sort of, the lines he was taking. And not go into the details. Think, okay, that detail's going to put him off. And that wasn't, I don't remember Srila Prabhupada didn't write Origins. That was something that we came up with later. Anyway, do you know what I mean? Could you comment on that? How to preach to smart people? Do we just leave that stuff and just concentrate on the big picture of there's a God?
Yes. So unfortunately what happens to smart people sometimes is that they often act in a very non-smart way. And there is a certain smartness or an intelligence which they exercise up to a certain level, and then from that level the smartness is stopped. And it then becomes whatever suits their senses. So if it suits my senses to have the idea that there's no creator, because then that way there'll be more impetus from society in general to buy the products I create using the manipulation of material nature, then so be it, I'll accept that. But if someone's actually intelligent, and you mentioned genetics, for example, they can perceive that only in recent years, say in the last 50, 60 years, do we even have an understanding of the components of genes and all of that within the body. There's tremendous design, the existence of tremendous design that scientists have discovered through sophisticated instruments. Now, where in our concept do we have a sophisticated design without a designer? This is typically the angle or the direction by which most scientific persons, when they reach a stage of no further, we have to force them to break through that barrier. It's an artificial barrier created by the cultures within which they operate. Science is not to blame for that. Science itself is a methodology. So sometimes when people go on about scientists are like this, scientists are like that, they don't really mean that. What they mean is that within that culture that some scientists operate, there is this presence, this prevalence, this pervasiveness of atheism. And that is the cultural aspect which has nothing to do with science. Because prior to adopting that culture, there was no scientific experiment that capably developed that or concluded that. There was no experiment done that concluded that the world has no creator, no God in control. There's a verse in the Gita which says that, right? The demons, they consider that there is no God in control. Everything spontaneously comes from matter. That's literally the demoniac mentality. So intelligent persons can see that it's not logical to accept the existence of chromosomes, DNA, the different base pairs, and use that to attribute the formation of bodies, but then to deny that there may have been design behind it. So that's typically the process we use. And There's the law and the lawmaker. Wherever there's a law, there's typically a lawmaker. We have a whole process. We always hear about it on the news, how a bill is raised, it goes through Parliament, goes through different houses, then it's formulated into an act of Parliament, then it turns into a law in the statute books. There's a whole process for that. You accept this process in modern laws here, but you don't accept the existence of a lawmaker for all the laws we then utilize through all our scientific gadgets. The laws of, so many laws that we model, as gravitation, waves, this, that. They exist. Well, who made them? You can't scientifically state no one made them. You've never managed to prove that. And there's nothing in your entire experience that heads towards that conclusion that no one made them. Because as of yet, no one has even demonstrated that even the existence of an energy source manifests into a wonderful creation with multiple objects, energies of full variety, all interacting with each other harmoniously in an ecologically sound world. No one's even demonstrated that on a microscopic scale. So when they claim that, you know that their science has stopped at that point. So we often have to break through and just advise them, you're a scientist, be a proper scientist. Think about it scientifically. Yes? Go in the proof. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So the Bhagavatam describes, the wives of Kashyapa. They gave birth to various species. So, even in modern days, if someone wants to find their father or mother, they can go in a database, and then they find, say, a sister. Because they're genetically similar to their sister, they can trace their father.
Yes.
So in the same way, if we have genetic similarity to other species, for me it's obvious because we have the common father, Kashyapa.
Yes.
So the idea that genetics proves evolution, it doesn't, because we have the theory of devolution.
Yes.
But genetics, if that's the mechanism through devolution, it doesn't actually disprove devolution or evolution. So it's just it's not a good argument to say genetically evolution is proven from genetic perspective.
It's more of a distraction, actually. It kind of just clouds the subject.
Thank you for a nice class, Prabhu. You mentioned about how it's fortunate that some of the science behind weaponry, etc., are the scriptures that have been lost in this age. But we know from scriptures also that in the previous age and at the very start of this age, some of the science, although available, was still misused by the people who used it. For example, obviously we have Ashwatthama's character there. We know that people generally used to curse others for whatever reasons, and we know Shringi's curses and so on. So how is it that it was possible in that previous age to have those scriptures and readily available, and yet the misuse continued? And in this age also we have access to that through yogic meditation and potential misuse of that also.
Yes, so knowledge is available in different ages, and it's always available to be used or misused. Mayadanava is the lead architect of the demoniac species, and they are very technologically sophisticated. They can do things described in the Shastra, in the Bhagavatam, 8th, 9th cantos. Descriptions are given of what they're capable of, the different realms that they created in order to hide themselves. They even managed to defeat Lord Shiva for a short period with their mystical abilities, their prowess. So in each age, yes, knowledge is available, and there are certain types of knowledge which are wholesome. Then there are certain practices which wholesome people keep away from, which are then termed dark practices or the dark arts, which those who have dark motives tend to utilize. So that energy exists, and there are different paramparas. Demons have good paramparas too, whereby that knowledge is transmitted very nicely. And the saintly persons also have their sources of knowledge. As the ages progress, a lot of things degrade. And so in Kali Yuga, there's a wholesale degradation. Most of the scriptures have pretty much disappeared. And this is why the request of the sages in Naimisharanya was to Sutta Goswami was, please select for us the essence of the scriptures, because there are so many scriptures and we're never going to understand them in Kali Yuga. Please select for us the essence of them by which we can make some progress. So there's a whole degradation where lots of information disappears right across the board. And it's not that information has only disappeared to protect us from causing harm. I'm saying it's just a happy coincidence. Thankfully, thankfully the weaponry we have available is less. Now obviously, if you stay on top of what's happening in the world, there's always the argument, specifically in America, of guns, you know? Does the prevalence of guns cause crime? Now most people can see that if you have guns in a large, prevalently available, easily available, then there is likely to be more gun-related crime. Now that's not rocket science. That's kind of, most sane people can see that if you have guns, you will have gun crime. It doesn't mean that the gun is responsible for the crime, which is another mistake people will make. But when you have very ferocious weapons, see how much harm can someone do with a club? You can go and hit someone, you can knock them on the head, you can kill them. With a knife you can also do that. But it's kind of difficult to do that to 100 people in one room in a few seconds. Whereas if you have a high-powered firearm, you can do that. And so therefore, if there is a person with a certain mentality which is highly degraded, they will use the most potent weapon they can to cause the most harm. Now, if the most potent weapon isn't available, the harm they can cause is less, right? That's just clear. And that's why persons who have criminal natures, they're restricted from having powerful things. They're restricted from having knives even, or whatever it is. So it's kind of that argument that when there is the existence of powerful items, you can misuse them. And so in Kali Yuga, the power of the available weapons is decreased, thankfully I'm saying, because those would be misused on a big scale. Because the actual purpose of having a society or a culture which progresses towards God has largely disappeared from every culture. When election time comes, the items on people's agenda are the economy and how to maximize my sense gratification. And therefore we have a society led by Vaishyas and Shudras. Those are the properties: economic development and sense gratification. The acharyas for those are the Vaishyas and the Shudras. The Brahmanas and the Kshatriyas are concerned with how to run society on a wholesome basis and how to run society to allow all the citizens to progress spiritually, to exit this world of birth and death. That's what the Brahmanas and the Kshatriyas are supposed to be doing. That's what they're focused on. So therefore we have what we have. A society selected, where the leaders are selected based upon their ability to make money and to give you sense gratification. Now, of course, many leaders are very nice leaders. They have noble characteristics. We certainly shouldn't judge anyone who is a leader, who may be in a prominent position as being only of these two things. No, many of them display many nice qualities, and that is to be acknowledged also and respected. But as Kali Yuga progresses, that becomes less and less the driving motivation. That doesn't necessarily sell so well in an election. When you say to someone, we will help you make progress and exit the cycle of birth and death, and go back to reclaiming your eternal position in the Supreme Lord's abode, you may not get many people who tick your box. But if you say a few juicy things about more sense gratification, more power, more economics, more Brexit, less Brexit, this, that, people will think, oh yes, this is real life. I can relate to this. You have my vote. So it's a funny situation. But Srila Prabhupada's desire was to help re-spiritualize society by really giving us the values that we've willingly let go, the values of nobility and the values of noble aims in life. Okay, let's take one final question before I go on Panihati.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much for class. I was just wondering, why does the Lord give us that kind of destructive knowledge in the form of like weapons and the dark arts in the first place, especially in Kali Yuga? Like it's just tempting in a place where it's not needed.
He does it because largely he doesn't interfere with our desires or the fulfillment of our desires. This entire world is created for one purpose only, to fulfill the desires of the living entities. So in the Bhagavatam, in one place, Srila Prabhupada says, this material world has been created and is given to the wayward living entities in the same way that a baby is given a playing cradle. So you know a cradle, a pram, the baby has some toys and it sits there, plays with those items. It's a little environment for the baby to play, to throw things around, to cause havoc. That's what babies do. And so the material world is the same thing. For the wayward living entities who wish to exploit the resources of nature, this place is created for you. There are some resources, there are some sources of energy. There are other living entities who, they also want to exploit the resources of material nature, which means you may have some competition. And then you're going to be competing for the same resources, because it's the material world. And therefore you will be fighting. And then as Kali Yuga progresses, those living entities that want to stay on and on and on in this cycle, they will have more and more chance to experience the real consequences of their behavior. So the Lord largely doesn't interfere. But at the same time, He's so merciful that He gives us an entire suite of options for exiting this world. He doesn't pretend to us that if you follow me, I will make the world blissful. Actually, this is a common misconception because the Lord says the direct opposite. He says, Dukhalayam shashvatam, napnumanti mahatmana. This material world is a place of misery from beginning to end. The most intelligent thing a person can do is to exit this place as quickly as possible. And therefore He gives us that knowledge, that science to do so. So we shouldn't think we'll be comfortable. Mahavishnu Maharaj, you raised...
What's the way to break through all this conditioning? What's the solution we have to apply?
Yes, so that...
For instance, Prabhupada in Vrindavan, he started these conferences with scientists. And life comes from life and so on. You know what Prabhupada was interested in? Are they getting nice prasadam? Are the scientists getting nice prasadam? Are they liking the temple? Do they see the deities? He had an idea that prasadam, the holy name, it would purify them and it would break through their conditioning. So what is our solution then?
No, that's a wonderful answer in itself. That if somehow these people get a chance to taste some prasadam, to hear the holy name, somehow by the expertise of the preacher, they get access to these items which are the real potent gems. They start to be transformed internally. They start to become a little receptive to the concept there's a Supreme Lord. And those barriers start to break. Shushrusho shraddadhanasya vasudeva katharuchi syan mahat sevaya viprat punyatirtha nishevanat. Just with a little service rendered to an advanced person, like Srila Prabhupada, somehow someone accidentally renders a little service to an advanced person. That person's ability to hear about higher topics grows. And that's the start of their progress. Then they have a chance to hear, and then it starts to act. Otherwise, so many people hear our philosophy. For many, it's closed. Doors are closed, nothing goes in. So something needs to open that door. Prasadam, the holy name. That's why all our outreach activities are so important. And then different types of people need a different type of persuasion also. You know, someone who's focused on earning money is preoccupied by wealth. Some people are preoccupied by those things. They need to understand how Krishna is the Lord of the Supreme Goddess of Fortune. And Lakshmi Devi doesn't go anywhere without the presence of Lord Narayan. That type of argument can work with someone who is very much focused on wealth. Someone who's focused on esoteric philosophies or thinking, or is more of a jnani, well, they can get great shelter from the Bhagavad Gita. The intelligent person can read this text in the Gita, it says, and it will satisfy them completely. So we have something in our philosophy for every person, and certain universal things remain. Prasadam, the holy name, universal to all. The most ardent scientist needs to eat. They haven't yet figured out a way to maintain themselves for long periods without eating. I mean, strictly that's not true. People in a coma are maintained for months, sometimes years, with the appropriate injections of nutrients, fluids, etc. That's possible, but it's not life really, is it? It's not life. So food is a universal requirement for everyone. And even those nutrients are extracted from food, so it's the same thing. Maharaj, is that okay? Thank you. Okay, shall I move on to Panihati? I'll just say I've gone way over time, but I thought I'd just mention a few things about this wonderful festival, where we actually hear of the mercy and the fortune of two persons, the mercy of Lord Nityananda and the great fortune of Raghunath Das Goswami. So as we heard in the morning during the announcements, this Panihati festival takes place in the place called Panihati. Its place still exists today. We now have an ISKCON temple there. It's about an hour from Calcutta, I think, roughly that kind of distance. And in this place, Raghunath Das Goswami, who constantly tried to run away from home because he'd had enough of material life, despite being phenomenally wealthy and materially completely comfortable. He once somehow arranged an appointment to see Lord Nityananda, where he was there with his associates. And he came and he offered obeisances from a distance, and Lord Nityananda saw that and said, "Bring this thief, he's a thief, bring him here." And so they brought him, and Lord Nityananda put his lotus feet directly on the head of Raghunath Das Goswami. And he said, "Now I must punish you." Now these I'm telling the story very quickly. These dealings are confidential interactions between the Lord and their master. So we should understand the mood within which these things are done. And so Lord Nityananda said, "I'm going to punish you. You must set up a festival for all of us here with yogurt and chipped rice." Now, at that time, this typically happens around this time of the year. It's hot, and yogurt is a very nice cooling item. So it was Lord Nityananda's desire that all his associates, all the devotees would receive this succulent preparations of yogurt, sugar, camphor, sweet rice. There were 2 preparations given to everyone. So Raghunath Das Goswami took this order on his head, and with great happiness he made this facility. He purchased as many ingredients as were available, plenty of milk, plenty of yogurt, plenty of chipped rice, and then all sorts of items to flavor those things. Mangoes, camphor, sugar. And there were 2 main pots of this produced. And each devotee, it's described in that whole assembly in Panihati, was given 1 pot with chipped rice in yogurt, and another pot, chipped rice in boiled condensed milk, sweetened condensed milk. And they were all relishing this. And during this pastime, Lord Nityananda manifested some special vision, or he manifested a special pastime. He was in great jubilation seeing everyone eat, and he walked through them all. And then in his mind, he called Lord Chaitanya. Now, most people couldn't see this, but some could. And Lord Nityananda, as he was strolling with Lord Chaitanya, he was feeding him morsels of chipped rice directly in his mouth. And then Lord Chaitanya was enjoying this. And then he took some morsels and fed them to Lord Nityananda. And those devotees who could see this going on, they were in great ecstasy, that these are the 2 lords. And so this pastime continued. People heard that there was a festival going on in this place. And then more and more people started to come, and especially lots of merchants started to come. And they brought more yogurt, and they wanted to sell it. And Raghunath Das Goswami bought all of it, it said. Everyone from the villages came with their wares and their items to sell. Raghunath Das bought everything, and then with those items, he fed them back to the same people he had bought those items from. And everyone was just in ecstatic bliss. This was such a fun festival for everyone. Then Raghav Pandit turned up, and seeing that the lordships were happy, sitting, eating, he then brought items immaculately prepared. Raghava Pandit was a great, great devotee, and he would prepare succulent items. And so he said to Lord Nityananda, "You're supposed to be at my home, and I've made an offering, but I see you're here having a festival." And Lord Nityananda said, "Well, I'm a little like a cowherd boy. I'm a cowherd boy, and I'm happiest when I'm having lunch with my cowherd boyfriends. And so let me enjoy this festival during the daytime, and at night I will come to your house and have prasadam." So that happened. They had all the eatables that Raghav Pandit bought. That prasad was also distributed. And then later he went to Raghav Pandit's house and had another chappan course meal, chappan bhog meal. Raghav Pandit was very special because he had a very special sister, Damayanti. And she could cook in an exquisite way. She would make all these delicious items, which are described in some of our books. And while Lord Chaitanya was staying in Puri, she would make all these items, and Raghava Pandit would pack them into these bags, the bags of Raghav Pandit. And he would take them to Lord Chaitanya. And this was done kind of in secret, so as not to make a whole scene. And Lord Chaitanya would accept those foodstuffs. And so, of course, their identity is quite exquisite also. They are gopis in the Lord's eternal Leela. But really from this episode and pastime, we understand a few things. We understand Raghunath Das's deep desire to serve the devotees. As soon as the opportunity came, given to him by the Lord, to serve the devotees, he jumped at the chance immediately. Used whatever resources he had to facilitate the pastime of Lord Nityananda. We also understand how Lord Nityananda is so merciful that he wants all the devotees to be happy. Lord Nityananda wants nothing other than everyone to take shelter at the lotus feet of Lord Chaitanya. But we also have to know one thing, that without the mercy of Lord Nityananda, we cannot do that. Raghunath Das tried on many occasions to get the direct mercy of Lord Chaitanya. Lord Chaitanya didn't allow him. He was rebuffed. It was only when this episode took place and Lord Nityananda gave his mercy to Raghunath Das Goswami that Raghunath Das Goswami was finally inspired. And he finally had a successful attempt to break away from practically what was his prison. You don't normally consider a luxurious palace and servants and a beautiful wife to be a prison, but for him it was a prison. But only after this episode he actually managed to break away from that and go to Vrindavan through a whole complicated adventure and get the real mercy of Lord Chaitanya. So without Lord Nityananda's mercy, we also cannot get the mercy of Lord Chaitanya. And the devotional life is one of ecstatic bliss. It's blissful. Devotional life is not dull, boring, austere. In devotees' lives, devotees practice austerity. So many types of austerity. And Mahaprabhu was so happy when especially he saw the Goswamis and others practicing tremendous austerity in their lives. It pleased him very much. But he also brought out this principle that spiritual life has natural spiritual fun. And when our goal is the worship and the pleasure of their lordships, Sri Sri Radha Krishna, Sri Sri Radha Gokulananda, Sri Sri Gaurnitai, we can have enough satisfaction, fun, entertainment within the society of devotees that we never have to go anywhere else. Prabhupada created ISKCON. One of the purposes of ISKCON is to bring devotees together, to give them other devotees to have association with. So Lord Nityananda and Lord Chaitanya are very much demonstrating that in the association of devotees, you have no need for anything. Actually, when we start to leave the association of devotees, that's when our problems begin. Because we now have to start making arrangements which are more in the realm of ugra karma rather than the mercy of the Lord. We start to miss the guidance of the devotees who help us direct our lives. we start to get influenced by other non-devotional mentalities and agendas of exploitation. So therefore, this item of association is so important. And the more time we can spend with devotees, in their company, at the lotus feet of Radha Gokulananda, that's the success of our life. So everyone has a chance to try to increase that to whatever extent is possible. And then, as we meditate on these leelas, we can literally imagine ourselves viewing that leela, participating in it. And so we may have a similar leela now coming up for breakfast. I don't want to hold anyone. Normally on this day they produce a little chipped rice festival for us. I don't know if they have today. We'll find out. I hope they have. But thank you all very much. Thank you for your attention and your mercy. Thank you, Maharaj, for your presence. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki. Hare Krishna.